Hello, I'm David Hardesty, and in this lecture we study the U.S. domestic tax rules for classification of aliens as either residents or non-residents. An alien is considered non-resident unless the person meets the tests for resident alien status. Accordingly, this lecture focuses on the tests for resident alien status. The objectives of this lecture are to understand the following tax rules: the green card test for resident status, the substantial presence test for resident status, the exceptions to the substantial presence test, the beginning and ending dates of U.S. residence status, the elections regarding first-year status, and the impact of tax treaties on residence status. Resident aliens are taxed in the United States on their worldwide income, while non-resident aliens are taxed only on U.S. source income. Accordingly, it is very important to distinguish between these two types of taxpayers. An alien is a resident alien of the United States if he or she meets one of the following two tests. The person meets the lawful permanent resident or green card test. The person meets the substantial presence test. Let us first discuss the green card test for residents. Under the lawful permanent residence test, or the green card test, an alien individual is a resident of the United States if the person is lawfully accorded the privilege of residing permanently in the United States as an immigrant in accordance with immigration laws. Let us now consider how resident alien status is terminated if such status is based on the green card test. Once this test is met, the person remains a U.S. resident until permanent resident status is revoked, such status is administratively or judicially determined to be abandoned, or a person commences to be treated as a resident of a foreign country under the provisions of a U.S. tax treaty with that country, and then notifies the IRS of the commencement of such treatment without waiving the benefits of such treaty that are applicable to a resident of a foreign country. Under most U.S. tax treaties, a green card holder is a U.S. resident, but if he or she is also a resident of the other country, then the residence is determined by a tiebreaker rule, under which the person will be deemed a resident of the other country if the person has a permanent home in that country, but not in the United States. Here's an example of the green card test. Alfredo, a citizen of Italy, was granted permanent U.S. resident status by the U.S. government in 2008. Immediately upon obtaining that status, he became a resident alien of the United States. He spent all of 2010 in Italy. Despite the fact that he lived in Italy, he remained a resident of the United States during that year. Let's follow the previous example into 2011. In 2011, while still holding a green card, Alfredo establishes his permanent home in Milan, and he gives up his residence in the United States. Under Article 2A of the U.S.-Italy Tax Treaty, once he established his permanent home in Milan, his U.S. residence status is terminated, but only if he provides the proper notification and waivers to the IRS. Note that the same result would have been reached if he had officially surrendered his green card to the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service. A person can be treated as a resident alien of the United States if his or her physical presence meets the substantial presence test in the Code. The substantial presence test for resident alien status is normally met when the taxpayer is present in the current year for at least 31 days and the special 183-day test is met. The 183-day test is met if the sum of the days present in the United States during the current year plus 1/3 of the days for the immediately preceding tax year plus 1/6 of the days for the second preceding tax year equals 183 days or more. Here's an example of the substantial presence test. Bjorn, an alien individual, is present in the United States for 122 days in the current year. He was present in the United States for 122 days in the first preceding calendar year and for 122 days in the second preceding calendar year. In determining his status for the current year, Bjorn counts all 122 days in the United States in the current year, plus 1/3 of the 122 days in the United States in the first preceding year, and 1/6 of the 122 days in the United States during the second preceding calendar year. The total of 122 plus 122 divided by 3 plus 122 divided by 6 equals exactly 183 days. Therefore, Bjorn meets the substantial presence test and is a resident alien for the current year. Even though a foreign individual may meet the substantial presence test in the current year, the person may be able to defeat resident status. As an exception to the substantial presence test, if the taxpayer is present for less than 183 days in the tax year, has a tax home in a foreign country during the year, and has a closer connection to that country than to the United States, the person is not a U.S. resident. A foreign individual claims exemption under the closer connection exception by filing Form 8840 with his or her personal tax return or by filing the form with the IRS if no personal tax return is filed. The taxpayer has a closer connection with the country with which there are more significant contacts, such as a permanent home, family, personal belongings, cultural and religious organizations, personal bank accounts, driver's license, voter registration, and country of residence designated on documents filed by the individual. The closer connection test is not met for a foreign country if the person has a pending application for permanent residence status. Here's an example of the closer connection exception. Chow is a citizen of country X and under the substantial presence test is considered a U.S. resident alien. However, in 2010, Chow is present in the United States for only 175 days. Moreover, Chow has a tax home in country X. Chow's family is in country X, and he votes in country X, and his banking and cultural relationships are in country X, and all of his furniture and most of his personal belongings are in country X. Under the closer connection exception, Chow can claim exemption from resident status. He must file Form 8840 to do so. Here are some additional exceptions to the substantial presence test. Canadian and Mexican commuters. A person regularly commuting from a residence in Canada or Mexico to a job in the United States is deemed not present in the United States on any day on which he or she commutes. Diplomats, employees of international organizations, and their families. Foreign government-related individuals, including diplomats, employees of international organizations, and their families, are considered temporarily present in the United States, regardless of their number of days of presence, and are not U.S. residents. For example, a foreign government employee of the United Nations stationed in New York is not a U.S. resident, even if the assignment has lasted for many years. Teachers, trainees, and students. If individuals are present in the United States as teachers, trainees, or students, then their presence is not taken into account for the purpose of determining if they are U.S. residents. These are individuals present under specific types of visas who comply with all the provisions of those visas. The exception for a teacher or trainee is lost if the person has been present in the United States for at least 2 of the 6 preceding years. Where this exemption applies, it also applies to the person's immediate family, including spouses and unmarried children under 21 who reside in the person's household. If an alien meets the lawful permanent residence or green card test and is treated as a resident alien, the question is, when does resident alien status begin? Here's the general rule. If the taxpayer meets the green card test at any time during a calendar year and does not meet the substantial presence test for that year, then resident status starts on the first day in the calendar year on which the taxpayer is present in the United States as a lawful permanent resident. That is, resident status starts on the first day that the taxpayer is present in the country with a green card. Note that if in the unlikely event the individual obtains a green card in the calendar year, but is never in the United States during that year, then residency does not start in that year. Here's an example of the residence start date based on the green card test. Rodrigo has never been a resident of the United States. He moved to the United States on October 1, 2010, and remains in the United States through the end of the year. On December 1, 2010, he receives his green card. He does not meet the substantial presence test in 2010. His resident status begins December 1, 2010, the day on which he is first present in the United States with a green card. If an alien meets the substantial presence test and is treated as a resident alien, the question is, when does resident status begin? If resident status is based on the substantial presence test with respect to any taxable year, and the person was not a resident in the previous year, then resident status starts on the first day the person is physically present in the United States during such calendar year. However, an individual can ignore up to 10 days of actual presence within that calendar year if he or she had a closer connection to a foreign country than to the United States, and the person maintain a tax home in that foreign country. See Form 8840 for required disclosures relating to the closer connection. To exclude up to 10 days of presence, the taxpayer must attach Form 8840 to his or her tax return for the relevant tax year. The requirements for the form and the statement related to that form are set out in Publication 519 on page 8. In addition, for purposes of the substantial presence test, up to 10 days of presence in the United States can be ignored in determining the final day of U.S. residence if the person has, during this 10-day period, a closer connection with a foreign country. Here's an example of the residence start date under the substantial presence test. Ivan is a citizen of Russia. He came to the United States for the first time on January 6, 2010, to attend a business meeting and returned to Russia on January 10, 2010. His tax home remained in Russia. On March 1, 2010, he moved to the United States and resided there for the rest of the year. Ivan is able to establish a closer connection to Russia for the period January 6 to January 10. Thus, his resident status starting date is March 1st. If the taxpayer meets both the substantial presence test and the green card test, then the resident status starting date is the earlier of the first day during the year the taxpayer is present in the United States under the substantial presence test or as a lawful permanent resident. Flores has never been a resident of the United States. He moves to the United States on March 1, 2010, and remains in the United States through the end of the year. On December 1, 2010, he receives his green card. He meets both the substantial presence and green card tests in 2010. His resident alien status begins March 1, 2010, which is the earlier of the days on which he would be considered a resident alien under either the substantial presence or lawful permanent residence tests. Here are the rules for determining the date an alien status changes in the last year of residency. If an alien stops being treated as a resident alien in the year, then if residence was based on the substantial presence test, the person stops being treated as a resident on the day following the last day of physical presence in the United States. If residence was based on the lawful permanent residence test, then the person stops being treated as a resident on the day following the day the person ceases to be a lawful permanent resident. Both of the above rules are subject to the following requirements. For the period after which residence is nominally terminated, the person must maintain a closer connection to a foreign country, and the person must not be a resident of the United States at any time during the following calendar year. Here's an example of the determination of the last date of resident status when residence is determined based on the substantial presence test. Beckman has been a resident of the United States under the substantial presence test since 2008. On October 15, 2010, he leaves the United States and does not return. His resident status terminates October 15, 2010. When a foreign person becomes a resident in a year, it is sometimes advantageous to claim resident status for at least part of the previous year. A special election allows a foreign person to do so. This is known as the first-year election. A person can elect resident status for part of a year that immediately precedes the year in which the person meets either the green card test or substantial presence test. To make this election for the preceding year, the person must have been present in the United States for at least 31 consecutive days during the previous year, and the person must have been present at least 75% of the days, beginning with the start of the 31-day period and ending on the last day of the year. When the election is made, U.S. resident status begins on the first day of the 31-day period. For purposes of the 75% test only, up to 5 days' absence from the United States may be treated as days in the United States. For both the 75% test and 31-day test, days on which the person was present as a diplomat, employee of an international organization, teacher, trainee, or student are not counted if the days are disregarded for the purposes of the substantial presence test. The election is made on the person's tax return for the election year, but may not be made until the person satisfies the substantial presence test for the year immediately following the election year. The election is made by attaching a statement to the tax return for the election year. See Publication 519, page 9 for the requirements for that statement. Here's an example of the first-year election. Hubert is a Country X citizen who has never been a U.S. resident for tax purposes. He is present in the United States from November 1st, 2008 to December 1st, 2008, exactly 31 days. He returns to the United States on December 17, 2008, and remains there through the end of 2009. Hubert is a resident in 2009 based on the substantial presence test. In addition, he can elect to be treated as a resident for 2008 starting on November 1st. The election is possible because he was present for at least 31 consecutive days in 2008, and he was present for at least 75% of the days during the period November 1st to December 31st, 2008.